Remember, we are looking at what happened between the Old Testament and New Testament. And we've gone back to the generals, the four original generals who divided up the empire that Alexander the Great had put together in a very short period of time. And we're particularly looking at two of those generals, the original general and the descendants of Seleucid and of Ptolemy. Seleucid had control of the areas to the north of Israel, and so in the prophecies of Daniel 11, he's called the King of the North, or whichever descendant is there, it's called King of the North. And the Ptolemies are referred to as King of the South because they had control over the area of Egypt. What we've seen so far is that there's a lot of interaction between these two families, and a lot of it occurs within what we will call Israel, as they are either fighting there, or either fighting over that land, or fighting there, or on their way there to fight one another. Thus far, we've seen a number of things happen between the two families. It almost seems like an unbelievable story in a way. There are a lot of things that happen that have to do with assassinations and poisonings and marriage between the two families, and divorcing and killing people in the family. All those things have happened so far. And in a way, that's kind of a prelude to the really important stuff that we're going to get to today. As you may remember, I believe the last thing that we talked about was concerning Seleucus Ptolemy the Third. Think about Egypt. Remember, Ptolemy the Third had conquered much of what was controlled by the Seleucids, and in the process brought back many idols and valuable items that had been taken from Egypt by the Persians. Remember, Cambyses had conquered Egypt and taken those things, and when he brought those back, the Egyptians, probably the first time, looked at a Ptolemy ruler with good feelings, because remember, the Ptolemies are Greek and the Egyptians are not. The Egyptians are Hamites, so they're very dark-skinned. The Ptolemies stand out. And the Ptolemies never cared to even learn the language of the Egyptians. They were simply their overlords. But here, finally, the Egyptians looked with good feelings toward Ptolemy, because he brought back a lot of the idols that had been taken from them and a lot of the wealth that had been taken from them before. So that's where we are now. And so they call him Ptolemy the Third, or Euergetes, which means benefactor. All right. So do you see where we are now in the text that you have in front of you, with Daniel 11 on the left side and the things that occurred on the right. So we've just looked at Daniel 11 verse 8. Everybody see where we are? Now we drop down to the last part of that verse, and we see that on his part he will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. And so what we find is that Ptolemy III doesn't attack the Seleucids for a while. He has a treaty with them because he's more interested in the areas up in the Aegean, Asia Minor, and Greece. Okay, everybody follow so far? Now, just as a side note, at the same time, the Persian Empire has dwindled, as you remember, with Alexander the Great conquering the Persians, and so they have dwindled in, and so there's a part of it left. Not called the Persian Empire anymore. It's called the Parthian Empire. And at this time, the Parthians are beginning to gain some strength. And so they're establishing an empire. And that empire is over in the land of the Medes. It's the northern part of the Persian Empire. And we'll talk about them more later, but this is where they're getting started. All right, now if you look at verse 9, it says that the latter, that is the king of the north, which would be a Seleucid, will return, or I'm sorry, will enter the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. Okay, what happens is this: Seleucus II, right here, attempted unsuccessfully to counterattack Ptolemy III in Egypt. Seleucus II, however, dies after he fell off his horse. It can happen, right? Any of you ever ridden a horse? Everybody probably has ridden a horse at least once, right? And if you ride horses as a hobby, or anybody do it very often? Anybody have a horse? It can be dangerous, right? All right, so anyway. He is succeeded then by his son, Seleucus III, you see here. And he was killed by some conspirators while he was on a military campaign up in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. And then, so his brother, Antiochus III, takes over. He's later called Antiochus the Great, but not yet. Now he's just Antiochus III. He became the ruler at 18 years of age, as you see, and reigned for 36 years. So his father, brother, not so long, but Antiochus reigns a long time. All right, so he comes to the throne of the Seleucids while Ptolemy III is in control of Egypt. Now, we notice what happens in verse 10. It says, his sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces. So that's talking about his sons would be Seleucus II's sons. That would be Seleucus III and Antiochus III. They're brothers, remember. And first, Seleucus III would mount a campaign against Egypt unsuccessfully, and then Antiochus III comes on the throne. And then we see in verse 10, and one of them will keep on coming. Well, here's the one that keeps on coming. And overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to his very fortress. And that's what happens as Antiochus begins to gain power against Ptolemy III. Verse 11, and the king of the south will be enraged and go. Well, what happens? We'll go forth and fight with the king of the north. All right, so he's going to fight against Antiochus III. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. So even though Ptolemy III has raised a great army to fight against Antiochus III, he is not going to be successful. And we see that, look over on the right. Unfortunately, on the right there, I have some sentences repeated there. So if you drop down a little bit to, I think just across from verse 12, Antiochus III launched an expedition against Phoenicia and Palestine. No, I'm sorry, that's repeated later. Let's see, go down a little bit further. Antiochus III succeeded in driving the Egyptians back to the southern borders of Israel. Ptolemy IV came to meet Antiochus III. That's what we had there in verse 11. And was initially successful in delaying the invasion of Antiochus. And Ptolemy slaughtered many thousands. Then we see that in verse 12. Look at Daniel 11:12. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall. Well, that's what Ptolemy did. Yet he will not prevail. Even though he causes a lot of people to die, he isn't successful. Verse 13, for the king of the north, that would be Antiochus III, will again raise a greater multitude, I'm losing battery, than the former, and after an interval of some years, he will press on with a great, and my tablet just died. So let's see, what can I do here? Let's that's still there. Okay, I will have to bring up my notes on the laptop. This has been a great day for technology. I've had trouble uploading lectures from U.S. history. Hopefully, we're able to get it worked out for world history. And now my tablet dies. All right, so there we have the Antiochus III launched an expedition against Phoenicia and Palestine. And you can picture where that is, right? Phoenicia along the coast, Palestine is, the area of Israel. And but he suffered a serious setback at the Battle of Raphia, as you see in your notes there, where the smaller army of Ptolemy IV, who had now come to the throne, Ptolemy III died. Ptolemy IV is now ruling, and he's able to defeat Antiochus III. But after a brief interruption, we see Antiochus III return with another army, much larger, and succeeded in driving the Egyptians back to the southern borders of Israel in this campaign. So you can see that reflected in verse 12. Now, just to put it in perspective of what's going on in the world, at the same time is when the Second Punic War is occurring. All right, so you can see we've kind of dropped back a little bit. We're moving forward. Second Punic War. Who's a very important person in the Second Punic War? We got two big generals. I'm thinking of one of them who might have something to do with this area over here a little bit later. And so who might that be?
Hannibal. Hannibal.
Remember Hannibal escapes from Rome's clutches. He's going to end up over here. We're going to see that in just a few minutes. But here's where this is when the Second Punic War is taking place. All right, so follow along down the right-hand column. In the peace that followed, Antiochus III was compelled to cede all Phoenicia and Palestine back to Ptolemy IV. So Antiochus remember, he had conquered those areas. Now he has to give them back and leave him in undisturbed possession of them until some more convenient time. During the following years, Antiochus attained his most brilliant successes in subduing and subjugating the rebellious provinces in the Middle East all the way to the Caspian Sea in the north and the Indus River on the east. So the Caspian Sea, remember, if you're looking at a map of the Middle East, the Caspian Sea is way far north towards Russia. All right, if you picture that, sorry I don't have a map here to look at, but up towards Russia. So he went all the way up that direction, and then the Indus River will be all the way to India. So Antiochus III has not been successful against Egypt, but he's been successful to the north and then to the east, conquering large territories. So he is a great general here, except in relationship to Egypt. Now notice what happens next. These invasions absorbed all his energies from 212 to 204 BC, but finally in 203, Antiochus saw his opportunity to strike at Egypt again. Since Ptolemy IV had just died, and he succeeded by Ptolemy V. Now, anytime there's a changeover in king, there are usually insurrections. That's usually a time to attack, and especially because Ptolemy V, who now becomes king, is only 4 years old. So Antiochus sees an opportunity. There's a 4-year-old in charge of Egypt. Now's a good time to attack. Would you agree? That would be an opportune time, right? Would you agree or not that would be a good time when there's a 4-year-old in charge? Okay. Have you ever fought against a 4-year-old? Yeah. Zach has. Wait, you're going around picking on 4-year-old Zach? Is that what you're saying?
I like to play wrestle.
You like to what?
Play wrestle.
Play wrestle, not for real.
No.
Yeah, just yeah. Can you beat them?
Yes.
Do you ever let them win just to be nice?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good thing to do. But anyway, Antiochus is not playing, is he? Yeah, he wants to take over Egypt. All right, so look what happens next. Look at verse 14. Now in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. All right, who's the king of the south? Come on, who is it? Who's the king of the south? There's only so many names you can give me. Who's the king of the south? No, Ptolemies are the kings of the south. Egypt. You had two choices, and you gave me the wrong one there, Griff. Ptolemy, you're the fifth. Remember, he is the king of the south. Are you leaving me a cupcake? Oh, I love one. As long it's not cream cheese, is it?
No.
Okay, great. I love your cupcakes, except I can't eat cream cheese. So those of you watching at home, if you'd like to send me cupcakes, I'll take them. Just don't send me cream cheese. Okay, here we go. Ptolemy the Fifth says there will be may rise up against him the violent ones among your people. It says. Now, who's talking here? In this prophecy of Daniel chapter 11, who's talking? Who's giving this prophecy? No. Who's giving it? Let's see. Where do prophecies come from? Who could it be? Who could be giving a prophecy about what's going to happen in the future? Who would know such things?
God.
What?
God.
God is giving the prophecy. And to whom is he giving it, John? Daniel. You didn't say Peter, did you? Daniel.
Say people.
Oh, people. All right, now, so when he says to Daniel that they're going to be those, the violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision. When he says to Daniel, there will be violent ones among your people that are also going to rise up, what does he mean by your people?
Jews.
The Jewish people, yeah. So God is saying there are going to be Hebrew people, Israelites, are going to rise up also at this time. Now let's look and see what happened. Look over to the right. We see that Philip V of Macedonia joined with Antiochus III against Egypt. So Antiochus has some help from Macedonia. And he's going against Ptolemy V of Egypt. And we're told there that many Jews also joined Antiochus against Egypt. So remember, the Jewish people are always caught between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, right? And this time, the Seleucid, Antiochus III, is going to attack Egypt, and along the way, he picks up a lot of Jewish people that are also supporting him, because they don't like being ruled by the Ptolemies. They want the Seleucids to win, so they help them out. All right. Perhaps the Jews hope to gain independence from both Egypt and Syria by joining the conflict. But their hopes were not realized. Their efforts were unsuccessful. And that we see that in verse 14, the next phrase, the last phrase of the verse says, but they will fall down. Does that sound good? No. What happened? Over on the right, in the year 200, this refers to the counteroffensive launched by the powerful general Scopas of the Egyptian forces. So Scopas is fighting for Ptolemy V, and he has forces that are going against Antiochus III. And he was able to push Antiochus back and take over the area of Israel. And what does he do? Because the Jewish people were supporting Antiochus, he punished all the leaders in Jerusalem and Judah who favored the claims of Antiochus and were disaffected with the Ptolemaic government. So all those people in Jerusalem, those leaders who were against the Ptolemies, and for the Seleucids, when Scopas took over that area, he punished those people. That's what it means when it says they'll fall down. All right, you follow? Any questions so far? But soon the war swept down from the north, and Scopas met with a severe loss at the Battle of Panium in 200 BC. From there, he retreated to Sidon on the Phoenician coast. Remember the city of Sidon? Sidon was populated by what people? What people had Sidon as a port? Yeah, Tyre and Sidon. What people was that? The Phoenicians, right, remember? And so Scopas here retreats to that area. Now, look at what it says in verse 15 on the left. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege mound. Remember, and now who's the king of the north, everybody?
Seleucids.
The Seleucids, which would be Antiochus III. So he's going to come. Remember, now Scopas is an Egyptian, or he was a Greek in Egypt, an Egyptian general, and he has fled to Sidon. So Antiochus III also goes into Sidon and sets up a siege around him. Look what it says in verse 15. The king of the north will come, cast up a siege mound, and capture a well-fortified city. Would Sidon be a well-fortified city? Yeah, it's been there for a long time, right? And the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land with destruction in his hand. All right, so what's it sound like happens here? As Antiochus III is coming against General Scopas of fighting for Ptolemy V, who comes out on top? What's it sound like?
Ptolemies.
No, the Ptolemy general is the one who fled to Sidon. He's the one against whom the siege is put up. So who is successful? Antiochus III, who came against him, is successful. Look on the right. Antiochus captured Sidon. When Scopas finally surrendered to Antiochus III at Sidon, the Antioch government, that's talking about the Seleucid government, to the exclusion of Egypt, permanently acquired the Holy Land. That's what it means when it says over in verse 16 that he will stay in the beautiful land. The beautiful land is talking about the land of Israel, the land of Judah. And he's going to stay there. And at this point, he permanently, at least in relationship to the Seleucids, acquires the Holy Land. Antiochus, we're told then, did not pursue a general policy of destruction once he had secured full possession of the land of Israel. He simply exacted reprisals from the pro-Egyptian party leaders that he was able to capture. So remember when when Scopas came up and captured Jerusalem, he punished all the leaders that had sided with Antiochus. Well, now that Antiochus has come back and captured Jerusalem, what does he do? He punishes the leaders that had sided with Egypt. So you wonder if Jerusalem is running out of leaders by this point. But other than that, he does not do anything too negative. Notice what it says. On his entrance into Jerusalem in 198 BC, he was welcomed as a deliverer and benefactor. The people were happy that he was taking over. They were more. The people living in Israel thought that the Seleucids would be nicer to live under than the Ptolemies had been. So he established himself in the beautiful land. Okay, now look over at verse 17. And he will set his face to come with the power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, or her, but she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Okay, now what's that sound like? Sounds like he's going to make a treaty with the Ptolemies, right? By doing what? How does it sound like he's going to establish a treaty? Can you tell by looking at the verses? Through marriage, right? But there was a problem, it seems to say, in verse 17. What seems to be the problem?
He doesn't want to.
Yeah, there's something about the woman that he gives to a Ptolemy that doesn't work out like he anticipates. We're going to see that's exactly what happens. Okay, look on the right. You see Antiochus sought to bring peace between Egypt and Syria by giving his daughter Cleopatra to marry Ptolemy V Epiphanes of Egypt. Now remember, Ptolemy V is the one that started out as a 4-year-old, but now he's getting bigger. And so Antiochus, we'll go back to here. Antiochus III has a daughter, Cleopatra, and she marries Ptolemy V. That should tie the two families together, right? Now, there's a reason why Antiochus is doing this, instead of just going in there and trying to conquer. First of all, he thinks that by marrying his daughter off, that his daughter will have an influence on Ptolemy V and influence her husband to not do anything that would hurt her father, Antiochus III. You can see why he would expect that, right? He also wants to make sure that there's peace here because he's going to attack some other areas, and he doesn't want Egypt coming against him. He doesn't want the Ptolemies coming against him because that would divide his fighting force. So a couple of reasons here for what he's doing. All right. So keep that in mind. His daughter Cleopatra is married to Ptolemy V. Okay, we're still here. All right, now, let's see. Find my place again. Because when I switched over to the slides, I lost it. All right, here we go. So over on the right-hand side, you see that Antiochus III gave his daughter Cleopatra to marry Ptolemy. I lost my place again here. Okay, here we go. To marry Ptolemy V. All right, and like I said, that was to keep Egypt off his flank as he pursued warfare, and it's particularly he's going to go against Rome. He sees Rome as coming more and more into his area. He wants to prevent Rome from taking more territory there in the east, and so he knows he's going to fight against them, but he doesn't want to fight against Egypt at the same time. All right. This attempt to bring a peaceful alliance, we read, between the two nations did not succeed. Why? Cleopatra turned out to be a loyal wife instead of a loyal daughter. So she apparently had more feelings of loyalty to her husband than she did her father, so she did not support what her father was doing, she supported what her husband was doing. Surprise, right? So what happens? Verse 18, over on the left, you see that he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many. Well, that's what happened. In 197, Antiochus III turned his attention to Asia Minor. You know, that's up in that area with a lot of coastlands along the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, and Greece. A lot of coastlands there. So that's what the scripture is talking about. Now, this is where the renowned self-exiled Hannibal comes in. He's left Carthage, and he's come over here, and he joined Antiochus III, or Antiochus the Great, we can call him now, and together they invaded Greece. Would it be an advantage for Antiochus III to have Hannibal on his side? Yeah, Hannibal's a great general, right? And so they're fighting together and invade Greece. But Antiochus did not succeed in conquering Greece. Why? If you look over in verse 18, we'll see, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. Who's this commander? On the right-hand side, you see that a guy by the name of Cornelius Scipio was dispatched from Rome to turn Antiochus III back. Does that name sound familiar? Cornelius Scipio. Does the word name Scipio sound familiar? Where have we heard that name before? Where have we heard of Scipio? Remember I told you that just before this was when the Second Punic War was happening?
Punic Wars.
Pardon me?
Punic Wars. Second Punic War.
The Second Punic War, who was he?
A general for the Roman army.
The Roman general who wins the Second Punic War. Right? This is his brother. Different first name, same last name, Scipio. All right? So, isn't it interesting how these things are all working together now? So Scipio comes and turns Antiochus III back. His full name is Lucius Cornelius Scipio, and then they give him the name Asiaticus. Just like they gave his brother the name Africanus, because he conquered in Africa because this brother conquers in Asia. They call him Asiaticus. All right. He brilliantly defeated, his brother had brilliantly defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, remember, back in 202 BC. This is just a few years later. During the winter of 190 to 189, the Roman troops followed Antiochus across to Asia. Remember, Antiochus and Hannibal had invaded Greece. Well, now they're being pushed back, and the Roman soldiers are following them. The Roman army is following them into Asia, and finally met him in a pitched battle at a place called Magnesia. You ever heard of Magnesia? You ever heard that word before? Some people take a medicine called milk of magnesia. You ever heard of that? No? I think it's just maybe old people that take that. I don't know. It used to be kind of popular. But that is where the Battle of Magnesia, which is just west of Sardis. Sardis is a town in Asia Minor. You may have heard of it. It's mentioned in the book of Revelation. All right. And they although Antiochus had an army, look at this, of 70,000 at his disposal to confront the Roman force of 30,000. So he has over twice as many men in his army, and yet the Romans badly defeat him. Now look at the results of this. This is amazing. Rome lost 400 men. Antiochus lost 53,000. How do you like those odds? 53,000. Thus, his insolence or reproach or reviling or scorn that talks about back over there in verse 18 indicates the fact that he met with disaster. All right, in 188, after he compelled, okay, let me see, I'm going to try to come over here and change the slide. I think we're ready for the next slide. Well, we'll get there soon. Now I've got to come back to my notes. So we are here. All right, so after he compelled Antiochus III to surrender, Cornelius Scipio dictated severe peace terms, which were included in the Treaty of Apamea, signed in 188. You don't have to know the name of that or anything, but I want you to take note of the peace terms. First of all, Antiochus was compelled to surrender not only all claims in Europe, which is where Greece is, but also the greater part of Asia Minor as well. His boundary was to be the Taurus Range. That's a range of mountains that's up in Asia Minor. So first thing he had to do was give up Asia Minor. Got that? The second thing he had to give up is he had to surrender his entire elephant brigade, all his navy, and 20 selected hostages. This is pretty severe. You give up your whole navy, all your elephants, and 20 hostages. Third, in addition, he had to surrender Hannibal and other refugees. But once again, Hannibal escapes. Hannibal's a one slippery dude. And then fourthly, finally, he was obliged to pay an indemnity. You know, he had to pay money of 15,000 or 20,000, I'm not sure which it is, talents over a period of several years. So in other words, he had a huge amount of money he had to pay the Romans. Now Antiochus III was going great. He had conquered a lot of territory, so much so that he's called Antiochus the Great. But now he runs up against Rome. And Rome is in the process of building and building and building, expanding, and Rome defeats him badly. He has to give up a lot as a result of this defeat. All right? Antiochus' second son, who is named after him, be Antiochus IV. Let's see, is he mentioned on here? Yeah, right here. Antiochus IV is one of the hostages, the 20 hostages taken to Rome. So one of them is his son. And he spent his formative years, he spent 12 years in Rome, being raised according to Roman standards, as opposed to Greek of his father. All right, now, look at verse 19. By the way, this is going to be important, the fact that his son is taken away as a hostage raised in Rome. Verse 19. So he will turn his face toward the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. What happened? Antiochus III returned to his own country in 188. Unable to meet the required indemnity payments out of his exhausted treasury, he has spent all his money, and yet he still owes this money to Rome. What's he going to do? He resorted to the sacrilege of pillaging, or attempting to pillage, the temple of Bel in Elymias. In other words, he decided to go to a temple in a local area and steal the gold out of that temple in order to pay Rome. That's his last resort. He does that. Now, as he's trying to do that, the local inhabitants were so incensed about Antiochus coming into their temple and taking from their temple that they stormed his modest armed force that was with him with desperate bravery. They just threw themselves at this local force, this little force that Antiochus had, and they succeeded in killing him and defending their temple. That's why it says in verse 19, he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Antiochus III, Antiochus the Great, had carried on the most vigorous military campaign of any of Alexander's successors. They all, in some degree, wanted to reconquer the area that Alexander had. Antiochus III came the closest. But his dream of reuniting Alexander's empire under his authority was never realized. Rome was his downfall. Now, what we find happening next just increases the amount of intrigue and relationship to the people of Israel, and it's going to have a major effect on what happens with the Jewish people in the years between the Old and New Testament on up into the time of Jesus. And so you want to make sure you come back tomorrow and find out what happens next. In the meantime, make sure you look over what we have gone over. I know there's a lot of names. And there are certain ones that stand out. Certainly, you should know a little bit about Antiochus III. You should know the difference between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies by this time. And to this point, Antiochus III is probably the most important person that we have come across. But look over what you have read and what you've highlighted so that you can get that in your mind a little bit so that you won't get lost as we proceed forward. That's the only assignment you have. Don't forget about your reading project on Thursday. You're dismissed.